Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2020 Senate election in the state of Massachusetts. We're not going to be discussing whether or not this is possible for the Republicans to pick up, but rather who's going to be the Democratic nominee in this 2020 Senate election. So right now there's a current incumbent, Senator Ed Markey, who represents a lot of the progressive base in the state of Massachusetts. He is now running against the United States Representative Joe Kennedy III, who is now going against Ed Markey for the Democratic nomination in this statewide race. Now, there is no real possibility that the Republican Party ends up carrying this seat. It's a safe Democratic seat, and it is an overwhelmingly solid Democratic state on the presidential level and pretty much in every type of level but the governor election. Actually, I think Massachusetts is the most Democratic state in the union, so realistically, shouldn't be too hard for the Democrats to win here. But if you take a look at the Democratic primary, there's only two people running: Joe Kennedy and Ed Markey. So what's so appealing about Joe Kennedy? Well, a quick look at his Wikipedia page. It tells you that he's a United States representative. He assumed office around the same time as Elizabeth Warren. They both were sworn in the same year. If you take a look, he symbolizes a very similar, the very similar ideology to what you might see in Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. A very much centrist approach. He gave the 2018 Democratic response to President Trump's State of the Union. That's pretty much where he got that whole presidential spiel, where a lot of people said he should actually end up running for president, much less Senate. And you take a look at the Senate election, it was speculated for a while, but there was no real concrete Joe Kennedy campaign. And realistically, when you challenge an incumbent in a solid state, realistically, you shouldn't be competitive. Well, Joe Kennedy is competitive now because he offers a alternative to a very popular incumbent, but Ed Markey is definitely not as well known as Elizabeth Warren. And if you take a look at primary history, Massachusetts is pretty much evenly split between a centrist and progressive voice. Now, if you take a look at the data for this 2020 Senate election, let me go back here. Joe Kennedy should have a pretty substantial victory. The most recent from Emerson College shows 58% of voters in Massachusetts supporting Joe Kennedy over Ed Markey. And then the UMass Lowell poll shows Joe Kennedy at 44% compared to Ed Markey at 42%. It's supposed to be a close race, and realistically, it's going to be a very close race. Ed Markey obviously is an incumbent. Realistically, it shouldn't be close. There was some speculation about some other candidates running, but since it has narrowed down, it's pretty much a race between the Biden Democrats and the Sanders Democrats, to put it in perspective for 2020. Now, the primary is a tad bit away. It's September 2020, but I can guarantee April went by extremely fast, and May is starting to pick up its pace really quickly. We might reach September sooner than later, and if everything's done by vote by mail, well, typically that benefits the centrist base, as it has older voters, and progressive voters are typically those who are younger voters who aren't too enthusiastic to vote by mail, but much rather caucuses and vote in person. May not even know how to vote by mail because they're very young voters. I don't know how to vote by mail, and I'm registered to vote, so I should be, whereas someone who may have done this multiple times definitely does. And typically, the older population is the more progressive, the more centrist population. When you take a look at the endorsements for Joe Kennedy, you can pretty much start to see where this centrist ideology is coming from. We have Kyrsten Sinema, who practically ran on a Blue Dog platform in Arizona, and I actually think she was a part of the Blue Dog caucus in the House of Representatives. But you take a look at a lot of these endorsements, a lot of these people are from out of state. They are from competitive districts. There are centrists who won in either 2018 or have just been in power for a significant period of time. As for people in the state of Massachusetts, he has an endorsement from a Republican, Bill Weld, who ran with Gary Johnson in 2016. He was actually the governor of Massachusetts, and another Republican for Gabriel Gomez, who ran in 2013. If you look at there's just a number of local politicians and labor unions, but for Ed Markey, he again has a little bit more support from those in the United States Senate: Joe Manchin, Jeanne Shaheen, Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren. A lot of this is because he is the incumbent, but I make don't be you cannot be surprised if these Democrats all of a sudden shift their support to Joe Kennedy. That's all I'm saying. Realistically, Joe Kennedy is just as electable as Ed Markey. Neither of these two guys are going to go up against the Republican and end up losing. The only possibility I could see is if Joe Kennedy ends up losing the nomination, ends up running as an independent, taking votes away from the Democrats, but they still end up winning anyway, regardless. But, make no mistake, The reason why these senators are endorsing Ed Markey is likely because they have worked with him for such a significant period of time, not because this is Joe Manchin endorsing a progressive in this race. A lot of these candidates know each other, or former candidates. A lot of these candidates have backed each other. The senators, sorry, I don't know why I keep saying senators, but they back each other in statewide races, and they campaign for each other. And in this case, an endorsement isn't really need to be said when Ed Markey is an incumbent running in Massachusetts, but realistically, this race is going to be insanely close. The RCP average doesn't even have enough polls to do it, but Joe Kennedy has never not led in a Democratic primary poll in the Senate race. He has such a well-known name. The last name Kennedy really drove a lot of his support. Obviously, the fact that he is a very good politician in Massachusetts, a representative who is practically loved by the Democratic Party, whereas Ed Markey, in a sense, really isn't. You can't really say a progressive in the Democratic Party is going to be loved by its constituents, mainly because the Democratic Party is not majority progressive. But if you look at 2020, the same year, we had a 2020 Democratic primary. Now, I understand Elizabeth Warren was still in this race, but she only got 21% of the vote in her own home state. That's reflective of what the original polling data had said was going to happen in this state. It was, let's go see back. As soon as this had happened, Joe Biden led in a number of Massachusetts polls that people really thought this was not going to happen. Obviously, it went back and forth between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, according to exit poll data. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden ended up winning the Democratic primary. Biden had the biggest Democratic primary comeback in modern election history, bigger than Bill Clinton's. And when you take a look at that, obviously, he was going to outperform in some states. But the fact Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders together, neither of them came out on top. Obviously, they did split a vote, but if you take out Bloomberg's vote, it still puts Joe Biden in a very good running to win the state of Massachusetts. I mean, it bumps up Sanders to 47-48%, but then that also bumps up Biden to 46%. 45%. But I mean, that's what's going to happen if you take out the other two candidates in the race. You can't say Biden only won because Elizabeth Warren was in the race. What if Michael Bloomberg wasn't in the race? There's no guarantee all of those Warren voters would have gone to Sanders, but there is an almost very big guarantee that a lot of those Bloomberg voters would have gone to Biden just because of the fact that they definitely agreed with Joe Biden way more in terms of ideology, whereas Warren voters could have just been Hillary Clinton voters left over from 2016 that wanted to see a woman in office but were still centrist at heart. In 2016, this is very reflective of what we might see in the Democratic primary in 2020 for the Senate race. A very narrow race in which Joe Kennedy ends up victorious. And realistically, based off the data we have right now, you could be pretty solid in your statement that Joe Kennedy was going to win here. But at the end of the day, when a lot of people see that little I by the name for certain candidates, they end up winning. Just because of the fact that they are the incumbent and people are complacent and people are happy, actually, with Ed Markey, a 50% approval rating to a 25% disapproval rating, liked by around most of the constituency. So realistically, he should have a really good shot at winning this Senate race. But again, there's still that centrist base in the state of Massachusetts. Whether it's the voters that voted for Hillary Clinton or the voters that voted for Joe Biden, they have elected or nominated two centrist Democrats on the presidential level both times, in 2016 and in 2020. And I wouldn't exactly say that, Ed Markey is somehow not fundraising as well as Joe Kennedy. Pretty much all of the top Democrats are raising money, $3 million plus at least for each of them, 3, 6, 8. But Ed Markey is the incumbent. You have that factor to say. If this was a regular primary, Joe Kennedy would be taking it away easily. And I mean easily. Okay, a progressive in Massachusetts is going to have an uphill battle, considering the fact that the majority of the state is still centrist at heart. Yes, they have Elizabeth Warren, and yes, they have Ed Markey, but sooner or later, one of them is going to be knocked out, and it's likely going to be Ed Markey at this point in time. Realistically, I'm going to say that it's going to be a very close race. I'm not too confident on which candidate will actually win, but the fact that this race is even competitive is a big win for a number of centrist Democrats. They're eliminating progressives and, stripping a lot of their power in the United States Senate at this point. Considering the fact that there's not many progressives in the United States House of Representatives, the Senate is the last part where, there are some outspoken senators who do have progressive platforms, and Joe Kennedy, as much as he might claim he is a progressive, definitely offers a lot more of the centrist appeal for the Massachusetts people, which is exactly why he's getting all of the Biden vote. I can say that confidently. and a lot of this Hillary Clinton vote that will likely push him narrowly over that finish line, the same way Hillary Clinton was narrowly pushed in 2016 with a 49.73% victory over Bernie Sanders. Neither candidate reached a majority. Hillary Clinton ended up winning by a plurality. So when you take a look at all of the data, yes, Ed Markey is the incumbent. He has that going for him. He's out fundraising. He's outraising Joe Kennedy in terms of money, and he's a pretty popular senator. But this race is going to undoubtedly be close. After Joe Biden's surprise victory in Massachusetts and Hillary Clinton's victory from 2016 looming over this race, and a number of polls that show that this race is going to end up in favor of Joe Kennedy, this race may not end up with good news for Ed Markey. But it's going to be extremely close, and the margin is going to be very, very close. And, once we hit September, we'll see the final results. It may seem like a long time from now, but this only gives more time for either candidate to expand or lessen the lead for one another. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.